Millionaire went to an orphanage to bring gifts and saw a boy who looked just like him as a child. What happened next will leave you speechless. Michael Johnson was known as one of the wealthiest and most influential men in his city. At 39, he had not only amassed a considerable fortune in real estate, but was also widely respected for his philanthropic activities. Michael fervently believed that good deeds could transform society, filling hearts with hope. From a young age, Michael was always an ambitious man. Born into a humble family, he worked tirelessly to build his empire. Initially, his relentless pursuit of wealth had made him somewhat arrogant, focused solely on his own gains. Business was his life, and financial success was his main goal. He married Andrea, a sweet and devoted woman who saw beyond his tough exterior and believed in the kind man he could be. Together, they had a son, Joseph, who brought a special glow to Michael's life. However, life had a peculiar way of teaching valuable lessons. A tragic car accident 6 years ago, which took the lives of his wife Andrea and his son Joseph, changed his perspective forever. Guilt and pain consumed him, and he realized that no amount of money could replace the people he loved. Michael had fallen asleep at the wheel while returning from a party in the early morning, a mistake he relived during his sleepless nights. Determined to make a difference, Michael dedicated his life to helping the less fortunate. He funded schools, hospitals, and various charities. His fortune began to serve as a tool for bringing positive change to the world, rather than just a symbol of his success. During one of his regular visits to needy institutions, he decided to visit an orphanage in a neighboring city run by a woman named Elizabeth. Upon arriving at the orphanage, Michael was warmly welcomed by Elizabeth, a middle-aged woman with a kind smile and compassionate eyes. Elizabeth showed Michael around the facilities, which were in good condition but clearly needed more resources. She explained the difficulties they faced, from a lack of funds to maintain the children to the need for more volunteers to care for them. Michael felt a pang in his heart, seeing those children, reminding him of his own son. During their conversation, Elizabeth mentioned that with Christmas approaching, it would be wonderful if they could provide a special celebration for the children, with presents they so desired. The sparkle in her eyes as she talked about the children reflected her dedication and love for them. Moved by the idea, Michael immediately committed to helping. He promised Elizabeth that he would organize a grand Christmas celebration without the children knowing, to surprise them. With his team's help, Michael began planning every detail. He hired a professional Santa Claus, ordered a huge Christmas tree, and started buying personalized gifts for each child, from toys to clothes and books. In the following days, Michael devoted himself intensely to preparing the event. He wanted each child to feel the magic of Christmas and believe in the power of kindness. His office, usually a place for serious business discussions, was now filled with Christmas decorations and gift lists. Michael personally selected the gifts, trying to imagine the smile on each child's face. As he organized the celebration, Michael reflected on his own transformation. He remembered how Andrea always talked about the importance of helping others, and how he, at the time, didn't pay much attention. Now, he understood. The meticulous planning and sincere desire to do good showed the transformation Michael had undergone. He was no longer just a millionaire. He was a man who understood the true value of compassion and generosity. With Christmas approaching, Michael felt anxious and excited. He knew that the event would not only bring joy to the children, but also fill his own heart with a sense of purpose and redemption. What he didn't know, however, was that this altruistic gesture would lead to a surprising encounter that would change his life in ways he could never have imagined. As he finalized the last details of the party, Michael looked at an old photo of Andrea and Joseph on his desk. He smiled, feeling closer to them than ever. He was determined to honor their memories, not just with words, but with actions that would make a real difference in the lives of others. The big day finally arrived. The orphanage was buzzing with excitement and activity, the children barely able to contain their joy. The walls were decorated with colorful garlands, twinkling lights, and carefully hung Christmas ornaments. A massive Christmas tree, glowing with lights and covered in ornaments, stood proudly in the center of the main hall. The aroma of freshly baked cookies and hot chocolate filled the air, completing the festive atmosphere. Michael arrived early, accompanied by his team and a hired Santa Claus, who was impeccably dressed in a bright red suit and a fluffy white beard. The children were delighted to see him, shouting with joy and rushing to greet him. Elizabeth, the director, welcomed them with a warm smile, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Welcome, welcome," Elizabeth exclaimed. "The children are so excited, they have no idea about the surprise we've prepared." Michael smiled, feeling enveloped by the children's contagious energy. He had invested so much time and heart into preparing this celebration, and seeing the joy on the children's faces was the greatest reward he could imagine. The gift-giving soon began. The children lined up, eager and full of anticipation. Santa called each child by name, handing out carefully wrapped packages. Each gift was met with laughter and surprised exclamations. Michael watched with a wide smile, feeling a wave of joy warming his heart. As the children unwrapped their gifts, Michael walked around the hall, interacting with them and watching their reactions. Each smile, each look of wonder, was a reminder of why he had chosen to dedicate himself to philanthropy. Then he noticed a boy sitting alone in a corner, away from the commotion. The child had messy brown hair and large, curious eyes. There was something in his shy expression that caught Michael's attention. He decided to approach, bringing with him a specially wrapped gift. "Hello, may I sit here with you?" Michael asked gently. The boy, with his head down, said nothing. Michael smiled and sat beside him, extending the gift. "This is for you. I hope you like it." The boy hesitated for a moment, but then accepted the gift with trembling hands. Slowly, he began to unwrap the package, revealing a shiny remote-controlled car. "Thank you," he murmured, barely audible. "You're welcome. What's your name?" Michael asked. "Matthew," the boy replied, still gazing at the gift with admiration. When Matthew finally looked up at him, Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something unsettlingly familiar about the boy. It was as if he were looking into a mirror of his own past. The resemblance was striking. The same face shape, the same expressive eyes. He started to sweat and his hands trembled slightly. "Do you like remote-controlled cars, Matthew?" Michael managed to ask, trying to keep his composure. Matthew nodded, still smiling. "Yes, very much. I've never had one before." Michael took a deep breath, trying to process the flood of emotions he was feeling. The sight of Matthew brought painful memories of his own son, Joseph. The similarity between the two boys was disturbing and inexplicable. After handing out the remaining gifts, Michael stood up and went to find Elizabeth. He needed to learn more about Matthew and why he seemed so much like his own son. "Elizabeth, can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, finding her near the Christmas tree. "Of course, Michael. Is everything okay?" Elizabeth asked, noticing the serious expression on his face. "I met a boy here. His name is Matthew. There's something about him. He reminds me of someone I knew a long time ago. Can you tell me more about him?" Elizabeth nodded, leading Michael to a quieter corner of the hall. "Matthew is 7 years old. He arrived at the orphanage as a baby. We don't know exactly when he was born. The story we were told, through a note found with him, was that Matthew's parents had died in an accident and someone, unable to care for the child, left him here. Elizabeth's words made Michael break into a cold sweat again. He thanked her but said he needed to go home. He needed to process everything he had discovered. When he arrived home, Michael took an old photo of his family. The accident that took his wife Andrea and his son Joseph happened exactly 6 years ago. He had fallen asleep at the wheel, and when he woke from a coma 3 months later, he learned that Andrea and Joseph had died. The guilt had consumed him since then. Now Matthew's story wouldn't leave his mind. There were too many coincidences to ignore. He needed to know more about the boy who seemed like a reflection of his own past. Something inside him told him that this connection was not just a coincidence. In the following days, Michael's unease only grew. The story of Matthew and the disturbing resemblance between them constantly haunted him. Determined to act, Michael scheduled a meeting with his longtime lawyer, Richard Morales. Richard was an experienced and trustworthy man who had assisted Michael in several crucial moments of his life. Upon entering Richard's elegant office, Michael was warmly greeted. Richard rose from his leather chair and extended his hand. "Michael, it's always a pleasure to see you. How can I assist you today?" Michael took a seat, trying to organize his thoughts. He took a deep breath and began to explain the situation. "Richard, I met a boy at the orphanage I'm supporting. His name is Matthew. He's 7 years old, and somehow he looks a lot like me when I was a child. It's like looking into a mirror of my past. I can't stop thinking about it. I want to learn more about him and maybe even adopt him." Richard listened attentively, his expression growing more serious as Michael spoke. He was well aware of the tragedy that had marked Michael's life, and the intensity of his words did not go unnoticed. "I understand, Michael. Adopting a child is a significant step, but before anything, we need to understand the legal process involved. Adoption can be a long and complex process, especially if there are no clear records about the child's biological parents." Michael nodded, feeling a knot in his stomach. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but he felt he had to do it. "I want to do everything correctly, Richard. I don't know where to start." Richard took out a notepad and began jotting down notes. "First, we need to gather all available documentation about Matthew. We need information from the orphanage and any records they might have. Then we file an adoption petition. This process can take months, sometimes even over a year." Richard paused, looking directly at Michael. "There is one thing we can do to potentially speed up the process. If there is any possibility of a familial connection between you and Matthew, it could simplify things. Have you considered a DNA test?" Michael felt a shiver run down his spine. The idea that Matthew could actually be his son was both hopeful and terrifying. "Richard, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. The boy looks like me, but how could he be my biological son? I only had a partner, Andrea, and she died in the accident along with our son Joseph. I don't see how Matthew could be my child." Richard nodded, respecting Michael's hesitation. "I understand. Still, it's a possibility we shouldn't completely dismiss. If you ever change your mind, I'm here to help." Michael thanked Richard and stood up to leave. He needed to process everything they had discussed. As he walked toward the door, Richard continued, "Michael, I know this is difficult for you, but sometimes the truth can be found in unexpected places. If you feel this connection with Matthew, it might be worth exploring all possibilities. We're talking about giving him a chance for a better life, and perhaps finding answers to the questions that have been haunting you." Michael paused at the door, absorbing Richard's words. He knew the lawyer was right. The uncertainty and the need for answers weighed heavily on his heart. "Thank you, Richard. I'll think about it. In the meantime, I'll focus on the adoption process. I want to give Matthew the life he deserves." Richard smiled, nodding. "Let's make it happen, Michael. I'll be with you every step of the way." Michael left Richard's office. his mind still in turmoil. As he drove back home, he pondered the lawyer's words. The idea of a DNA test stirred his emotions in ways he hadn't anticipated. But for now, he decided to focus on the adoption process, determined to give Matthew a chance at a better life. When he arrived home, Michael looked once again at the photo of his family. He knew he had a long road ahead, but he was resolved to uncover the truth and, if possible, bring Matthew into his life. Destiny had placed that boy in his path for a reason, and he would not rest until he fully understood this inexplicable connection. Michael's unease did not diminish. The unanswered questions about Matthew tormented him day and night. Determined to go beyond the adoption process, Michael decided to hire a private investigator to uncover more about the boy's origins. He wanted to understand the strange resemblance and perhaps find a clue that explained the connection he felt with Matthew. Luis Vasquez was a renowned investigator in the region, known for his skill in unraveling the most complex cases. Michael scheduled a meeting with him in his office, a discreet place filled with files and surveillance equipment. "Mr. Johnson, it's a pleasure to meet you. I understand you have an intriguing case for me," Luis said, shaking Michael's hand firmly. "Yes, Luis. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice. I need you to find out everything you can about a boy named Matthew who lives in an orphanage. He is 7 years old, and his story is shrouded in mystery. I need to know who his biological parents are and how he ended up in the orphanage. The resemblance between him and my deceased son is unsettling, and I need answers." Luis nodded, taking out a notebook and beginning to jot down the details. "Got it. We'll start with the basics. I'll need access to the orphanage records and any other documentation you can provide. Then we'll trace all available leads." Michael handed Luis a folder with copies of the records Elizabeth had shared with him. Luis quickly reviewed the documents, making mental notes. "I'll start with the orphanage, speak with the director, and review the records. I'll also look for any additional information that might not be in these documents. We might need to dig deeper, possibly even checking hospitals and the areas where Matthew was found." In the following days, Luis began his investigation at the orphanage. He spoke with Elizabeth, who provided all the information she had about Matthew, including the note found with him. Luis took photos of the note and made copies of the documents, searching for any useful clues. Next, Luis visited the local hospital to check if there were any records of a baby being left or abandoned around the time Matthew was found. He also reviewed newspaper archives and news reports for any mention of an accident that could be related to Matthew. During his investigation, Luis uncovered some intriguing clues. Firstly, he discovered that around the same time Matthew was left at the orphanage, there had been a serious car accident in the area. The records indicated that a couple had died, but there was no mention of a child involved in the accident. This caught Luis's attention, as it seemed to match the story Elizabeth had told Michael. Luis compiled all this information, aware that there was still much more to investigate. He knew he was only at the beginning of a complex case, but was confident that, with time and dedication, he could provide the answers Michael was seeking. Determined to get closer to Matthew, while waiting for the investigation's progress, Michael began to visit the orphanage more frequently. Each visit was an opportunity to get to know the boy who intrigued him so much, and to develop a bond that felt increasingly natural. During the initial visits, Michael kept his interactions light and casual, bringing small gifts and games that he knew the children would enjoy. Gradually, Matthew started to feel more comfortable around Michael, although his natural shyness made him hesitant to open up completely. On a sunny Saturday, Michael brought a new soccer ball to the orphanage. Knowing that Matthew liked soccer, he hoped this would be a good way to connect. "Hi, Matthew, how about we play a bit today?" Michael asked, holding up the ball. Matthew looked at him, his eyes shining with interest but still hesitant. "I like soccer, but I usually play alone," he murmured. "Well, today we can play together. What do you think? We can form a team and see who scores more goals," Michael suggested with an encouraging smile. Matthew nodded shyly and followed Michael to the small field behind the orphanage. They started slowly, with Michael letting Matthew set the pace. Gradually, Matthew loosened up, showing his skills and even attempting a few dribbles. Michael, though not as skilled as the boy, genuinely enjoyed himself. After an hour of playing, both were exhausted but happy. They sat on the grass to rest, and Michael took the opportunity to chat more with Matthew. "You play really well, Matthew. Have you been practicing for a long time?" Michael asked, trying to learn more about the boy's interests. Matthew smiled, proud of his performance. "I've liked playing since I was little. At the orphanage, whenever I can, I stay here kicking the ball. It makes me feel free." "I understand. And besides soccer, what else do you like to do?" Michael asked, curious about Matthew's other interests. "I like reading adventure stories and playing with cars. Sometimes I draw too. I like to imagine different places and draw them," Matthew replied, still shy but more open than before. "Drawing? That's amazing. Maybe you could show me some of your drawings next time I visit," Michael suggested, excited at the idea of seeing more of Matthew's world. Matthew nodded, a shy smile forming on his face. "I'd like that." Michael's visits to the orphanage became a regular ritual. Every time he arrived, the children gathered around him, but he always set aside special time for Matthew. They played soccer, read books together, and as promised, Matthew showed his drawings. Michael was impressed by the boy's creativity and talent, with Matthew drawing fantastic worlds and adventures that seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Over time, Matthew began to open up more about his hopes and dreams. He talked about wanting to be a professional soccer player, or perhaps a famous artist, traveling the world and seeing different places. Michael listened attentively, encouraging him and showing that all his dreams were possible. This growing closeness brought a new light to Matthew's eyes. He began to look forward to Michael's visits, counting the days until they could spend time together again. For Michael, these visits were a balm for his heart, filling a void he hadn't even realized could be filled. The bond between the two grew stronger with each meeting, and Michael felt increasingly that he was on the right path. Matthew was no longer just a boy in an orphanage. He was now an important part of his life, and Michael was determined to do everything in his power to ensure that this bond was permanent. As Michael strengthened his bond with Matthew, Lewis continued his meticulous investigation. He spent hours sifting through old files, interviewing hospital staff, and speaking with local residents who might have information relevant to Matthew's past. After weeks of investigation, Lewis finally found a crucial lead. On a cloudy afternoon, while reviewing old medical records, he came across a document that caught his attention. It was a medical report from 6 years ago, describing a car accident involving a couple. The report mentioned that the couple had died in the accident, but had an additional note. "Male baby found at the scene, taken to the hospital for evaluation." Lewis felt his heart race. This could be the breakthrough he had been searching for. He continued his investigation and managed to access the hospital admission records from that time. He confirmed that a baby had been brought to the hospital, but the records were unclear about what happened next. It seemed that the baby had disappeared from the records shortly after the initial admission. With this new information, Lewis compiled all the documents and reports he had found and scheduled an urgent meeting with Michael. In Michael's office, Lewis presented his findings. "Mr. Johnson, I have found some information that I believe is extremely relevant to Matthew's case. There are records of a car accident that occurred around the same time Matthew was left at the orphanage. The report mentions a couple who died in the accident and a baby who was taken to the hospital. The baby's records match Matthew's age and circumstances, Michael listened attentively, feeling a shiver run down his spine. The coincidences were unsettling. "And what else did you find, Lewis?" "Well, there's something even more intriguing. In the hospital records, the names of the deceased parents are Andrea and Michael. I know this sounds impossible, but these are the names in the documents." Michael was stunned, unable to process what he was hearing. Andrea and Michael were the names of him and his deceased wife. How could there be a record of these names associated with the accident and a baby? "This doesn't make sense, Lewis. How could these names be in the records? I was in the accident, Andrea died, and our son Joseph also. I was in a coma for 3 months, and when I woke up, they had already been buried." Lewis nodded, understanding Michael's confusion. "I understand, Mr. Johnson. At first I was perplexed too, but these are the names in the documents. We need to investigate further to understand how this is possible. There might be an error or something we're not seeing clearly. We may need more hospital records or even witnesses who can clarify this confusion." Michael was stunned. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together in a way he had never imagined. He needed answers and was more determined than ever to uncover the truth about Matthew. "Lewis, keep investigating. I want to know exactly what happened. This coincidence is too disturbing to ignore. If there is a real connection between Matthew and my family, we need to find out." Lewis nodded, determined to unravel the mystery. He knew he was only scratching the surface of something much bigger and more complex. With Michael's permission, he would continue to follow every possible lead until the truth was finally revealed. "I understand, Mr. Johnson. At first I was perplexed too, but these are the names in the documents. We need to investigate further to understand how this is possible. There might be an error or something we're not seeing clearly. We may need more hospital records or even witnesses who can clarify this confusion." Michael was stunned. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together in a way he had never imagined. He needed answers and was more determined than ever to uncover the truth about Matthew. "Lewis, keep investigating. I want to know exactly what happened. This coincidence is too disturbing to ignore. If there is a real connection between Matthew and my family, we need to find out." Lewis nodded, determined to unravel the mystery. He knew he was only scratching the surface of something much bigger and more complex. With Michael's permission, he would continue to follow every possible lead until the truth was finally revealed. After Lewis's revelations, Michael was deeply shaken. The possibility that Matthew could be his biological son was an idea he had initially dismissed, but now it seemed inevitable that he needed to confront this possibility. The coincidences were too disturbing to ignore. For days, Michael pondered over what to do. He thought about Matthew, the visits to the orphanage, and the bond he had developed with the boy. More and more, he felt the need for a definitive answer. The uncertainty consumed him, and he knew there was only one way to obtain the truth: a DNA test. On a cold winter morning, Michael made his decision. He scheduled a meeting with Richard, his lawyer, to discuss the next steps. In Richard's elegant office, Michael explained his decision with renewed firmness. "Richard, I've thought a lot about this. I want to do the DNA test to find out if Matthew is really my son. I can't live with this doubt. I need to know the truth." Richard nodded, understanding the seriousness of Michael's decision. "I understand, Michael. Doing the DNA test is a sensible choice given the circumstances. We'll prepare everything discreetly to protect Matthew's privacy and ensure the results are accurate." Preparations for the DNA test began immediately. Richard arranged for the collection of samples from Michael and Matthew, ensuring that everything was done professionally and confidentially. Michael explained the situation to Elizabeth, who, although surprised, agreed to help. When the day for the sample collection arrived, Michael was nervous. He went to the orphanage to pick up Matthew, trying to stay calm so as not to worry the boy. On the way to the clinic, Matthew seemed intrigued, but trusted Michael. "Where are we going, Michael?" asked Matthew, looking out the car window. "We're going to a clinic to do a test, Matthew. It's just to make sure of a few things. It won't hurt, I promise," Michael replied, trying to reassure him. As they drove, Matthew marveled at the luxurious interior of the car. "This car is really cool. I've never been in a car like this before. At the orphanage, we only ride buses when we go on outings." Michael smiled, appreciating Matthew's enthusiasm. "I'm glad you like it. Who knows, one day we might go on many outings together." At the clinic, the sample collection was quick and painless. Matthew was brave, following the nurse's instructions carefully. Michael, on the other hand, was a bundle of nerves. Every second felt like an eternity as he waited for the procedure to be completed. After the samples were collected, Michael and Matthew returned to the car. On the way back to the orphanage, Matthew couldn't hide his curiosity. "Michael, why do we need to do this test? Is it to see if I'm sick?" Michael took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "No, Matthew. It's not to see if you're sick. It's just to make sure of some important things. You're a very special child to me, and I want to make sure everything is okay." Matthew seemed satisfied with the answer, though still a bit confused. "I trust you, Michael. If you say it's important, then it must be." In the following days, the wait for the results was agonizing. Michael could barely concentrate on his business. His nights were restless, and his thoughts always returned to Matthew. He imagined all possible scenarios, trying to prepare himself emotionally for any outcome. Meanwhile, he continued to visit Matthew regularly at the orphanage, maintaining their activities and conversations. Each visit strengthened the bond between them, making it even more crucial for Michael to discover the truth. The waiting days were finally over. The phone call from Richard, informing that the DNA test results were ready, brought a mix of relief and anxiety to Michael. He knew he was about to discover the truth, a truth that could change his life forever. The next morning, Michael headed to Richard's office. The journey there seemed longer than usual, each traffic light and each turn increasing his anxiety. When he finally arrived, he took a deep breath before entering. Richard was waiting for him in the meeting room, an unopened envelope in hand. His expression was serious, but there was a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "Michael, here are the results," Richard said, extending the envelope. "If you're ready, we can open it together." Michael nodded, sitting down in the chair in front of the desk. His hands trembled slightly as he took the envelope. With one last look at Richard, he opened the envelope and pulled out the document. Michael's eyes quickly scanned the lines of text, searching for the crucial information. When he finally found what he was looking for, he stopped, reading and rereading the words to ensure he was understanding correctly. "Michael, the results confirm that Matthew is Joseph, your biological son," Richard said, breaking the silence. "He survived the accident." Michael felt a wave of intense emotions wash over him. Tears welled up in his eyes as he tried to process the news. Matthew, the boy he had known and with whom he had formed such a strong bond, was indeed his son Joseph, whom he thought he had lost forever. "He's alive. My son is alive," Michael murmured, more to himself than to Richard. Richard nodded, giving Michael a moment to absorb the revelation. "This changes everything, Michael. Now we can initiate the adoption process more directly, as you are Matthew's biological father. This should significantly expedite the legal process." Michael wiped his tears and looked at Richard with determination. "I want him to come live with me as soon as possible. He has already spent too much time away from his family, and we also need to change his name back to Joseph." Richard began taking the necessary notes. I'll take care of everything. It will be a simpler process now that we have confirmation of kinship. We'll make sure everything is done correctly. In the following days, Michael continued visiting Matthew at the orphanage, keeping the news of the results a secret until everything was in place. He wanted the moment to be special, a new beginning for both of them. Meanwhile, he spent sleepless nights reflecting on the strange journey fate had charted for him and his son. The joy of knowing Joseph was alive mingled with the pain of the memories of the accident and the loss of Andrea. Each visit to the orphanage reinforced his commitment to giving Matthew, or rather Joseph, the loving and secure life he deserved. Finally, Richard informed Michael that all the documents were ready to start the formal adoption process. Michael felt a wave of relief and joy. He knew there were still challenges ahead, but now he had an unwavering certainty. He would do everything in his power to be the best father possible for Joseph. With the confirmation that Matthew was indeed his son Joseph, Michael was determined to complete the adoption process as quickly as possible. The truth revealed by the DNA test had transformed his life, and now he had a clear goal: to bring Joseph home. The adoption process, although now simplified due to the biological relationship, still presented legal and emotional challenges. Richard, Michael's trusted lawyer, began handling all the necessary paperwork to ensure that the adoption was completed as swiftly and efficiently as possible. Michael, even with the confirmed kinship, "We need to follow the legal procedures for adoption," Richard explained during one of their meetings. "This involves psychological evaluations, social worker visits, and a series of documents that need to be presented to the court." Michael nodded, understanding the complexity of the process. "Do whatever is necessary, Richard. I'm prepared to face any challenge to bring Joseph home." As the legal process continued, Michael knew it was time to talk to Matthew about the adoption and reveal the truth. During one of his visits to the orphanage, he took Matthew for a walk in the park, a quiet place where they could talk openly. Sitting on a bench under the shade of a large tree, Michael looked into Matthew's eyes and held his small hands. "Matthew, I have something very important to tell you," Michael began, his voice soft and filled with emotion. "Remember the test we did some time ago? The results showed something incredible. You're not just a special child to me. You are my biological son. You are Joseph, my son whom I thought I had lost in the accident." Matthew looked at Michael with wide eyes, processing the information. "I'm really your son?" he asked, his voice filled with surprise and hope. Michael nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Yes, you are my son, Joseph, and I want to adopt you officially so that we can be a family again." Matthew began to cry, but a smile lit up his face. He hugged Michael tightly. "I always felt that you were special to me, Daddy. I also want to be part of your family." With the revelation made and the bond between them strengthened, Michael continued to move forward with the adoption process. Richard organized all the necessary evaluations, and social workers visited Michael's home, checking the safe and loving environment he was prepared to offer Joseph. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. Michael, accompanied by Richard and Matthew, entered the courtroom. The judge reviewed all the documents and evaluations presented, patiently listening to Richard's explanations. "Mr. Johnson," the judge said, looking directly at Michael, "the documents are in order, and all evaluations indicate that you are a capable and dedicated father. I am inclined to approve this adoption. However, there is a request to change the child's name. I would like to hear your opinion on this." Michael looked at Matthew, who was by his side, holding his hand. He recalled their conversations about the name. Matthew had expressed a desire to keep part of his identity from the orphanage. "Your Honor," Michael began, "Matthew requested to keep part of his name from the orphanage. In gratitude for the place that cared for him for so long, we would like to change his name to Joseph Matthew Johnson." The judge smiled and nodded. "That is a very nice gesture. The adoption is approved and the child's name will be officially Joseph Matthew Johnson." Michael felt a wave of relief and joy. He thanked the judge, the lawyer, and everyone who helped with the process. As they left the courthouse, he knelt beside Joseph Matthew and hugged him tightly. "Joseph Matthew, now we are officially a family," Michael said, emotional. Joseph Matthew smiled, his eyes shining with happiness. "I'm so happy, Daddy. Thank you for everything." "I'm happy too, son. Let's go home. We have so much to do together." As Michael and Joseph Matthew began to adjust to their new life together, Lewis continued his tireless investigation. The truth about how Joseph Matthew survived the accident and ended up in the orphanage was still shrouded in mystery, and Lewis was determined to uncover the whole story. After weeks of research and interviews, Lewis finally found a crucial lead. He managed to locate Amelia, the nurse who had worked at the hospital at the time Joseph Matthew was brought in after the accident. Amelia had left the hospital abruptly and seemed to have vanished, but Lewis, with his investigative skills, tracked her down to a small town on the outskirts. Lewis traveled to the town and, with the help of local contacts, arranged a meeting with Amelia at a discreet cafe. When he arrived, he found a middle-aged woman with a tired but determined expression. "Amelia, my name is Luis Vasquez. I'm a private investigator, and I'm here to talk about a case you know well," Lewis began, trying to stay calm. Amelia looked at him, initially suspicious, but then nodded. "I know why you're here. It's been a long time, but I knew someone would come after me someday." Lewis leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "Can you tell me what really happened to baby Joseph Matthew after the accident? We need the truth." Amelia sighed deeply and began to tell her story. "On the night of the accident, I was on duty at the hospital. When the baby was brought in, he was critically injured but alive. The parents didn't survive. I was approached by a man who offered me a large sum of money to hand over the baby to him. He said the child would be well taken care of, but something seemed off. When I refused, he threatened me. Scared, I decided to take the baby to a safe place." Lewis listened attentively, making mental notes. "So you left Joseph Matthew at the orphanage?" "Yes," Amelia confirmed. "I left him at the orphanage with a note telling a false story about the parents' death. I couldn't risk him falling into the wrong hands, but I also knew I couldn't care for him on my own." Lewis nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Do you know who the man was that wanted the baby?" Amelia shook her head. "He never revealed his name, but I knew he was someone powerful. After that, I left the hospital and went into hiding, fearing he might come looking for me." Lewis thanked Amelia for her honesty and assured her that she would be protected. He then went to meet Michael to report his findings. In Michael's office, Lewis presented the detailed information about the plot. "Michael, we have Amelia's confession. She explained that she was coerced into handing over Joseph Matthew, but instead left him at the orphanage to protect him." Michael felt a mix of anger and relief. "Who was responsible for this, Lewis? Who tried to take my son?" "Unfortunately, Amelia couldn't identify the man, but we're closer to finding out. The important thing is that we know Joseph Matthew was taken to the orphanage as an act of protection, not negligence." The information was turned over to the authorities, who began an investigation into the kidnapping and threats. Amelia agreed to testify, providing details about the man who approached her. With her testimony, authorities started tracking potential suspects. Amelia's legal consequences were mitigated by her role in protecting Joseph Matthew and her willingness to cooperate with the investigation. She was placed under witness protection while the search for the mysterious man continued. For Michael, the revelation of the truth brought a sense of closure. He knew there was more work to be done to ensure Joseph Matthew's safety, but now he understood the chain of events that led his son to the orphanage. Grateful to finally have the truth, he focused on building a secure and happy future for his new family. With Amelia's confession and the new leads obtained, the investigation into the mysterious man who tried to take Joseph Matthew gained momentum. Lewis, determined to uncover the full truth, redoubled his efforts to identify and capture the culprit. Utilizing all his resources and contacts, he finally secured a solid lead. The details provided by Amelia, combined with old hospital records and information from other witnesses, led Lewis to a dubious businessman in the area known as Alejandro Delgado. Alejandro had a history of involvement in illegal activities, including document forgery and kidnappings. Lewis immediately informed Michael and the authorities of his findings. The police organized an operation to arrest Alejandro and gather all necessary evidence for his conviction. On the morning of the operation, Lewis accompanied the police to Alejandro's mansion. The tension was palpable as officers surrounded the property. With a search and seizure warrant in hand, they entered Alejandro's house, where he was caught by surprise. Alejandro attempted to resist and flee, but was quickly subdued and handcuffed. Lewis, observing closely, felt a sense of relief as he saw the man finally captured. The search of the property revealed a significant amount of forged documents, including hospital records and identity papers. During the interrogation, Alejandro initially tried to deny any involvement, but the evidence was overwhelming. Under pressure, he finally confessed his role in the attempted kidnapping of Joseph Matthew. He admitted to having forged documents to cover up the child's disappearance and protect his identity while attempting to sell the baby to a wealthy family abroad. "I saw an opportunity to make a lot of money," Alejandro said coldly. "I didn't care what I had to do to get it." The authorities not only arrested Alejandro, but also dismantled his network of illegal activities. The news of his capture and the shocking revelations about his operations quickly spread, causing a significant impact on the community. Michael, informed of Alejandro's arrest, felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that the man responsible for kidnapping his son was finally behind bars, and anger at the atrocities Alejandro had committed. Richard, Michael's lawyer, ensured that all evidence was presented to the court. With Alejandro's confession and the collected evidence, the conviction was swift and severe. Alejandro was sentenced to many years in prison for kidnapping, document forgery, and several other charges. With Alejandro's arrest, Michael felt that a painful chapter of his life was finally closing. He visited Lewis to personally thank him for his tireless dedication to the case. "Lewis, you not only brought my son back, but also ensured that justice was served. I have no words to express my gratitude," Michael said, shaking the investigator's hand. "It was a pleasure to help, Michael." "Seeing the truth come to light and knowing that Joseph Matthew is safe is the best reward," Lewis replied with a smile. For Michael and Joseph Matthew, life was finally beginning to follow a more peaceful and secure path. They continued to strengthen their bond, and Michael dedicated himself to providing Joseph Matthew with a childhood full of love and opportunities. Michael's mansion, once silent and solitary, was now filled with life and laughter. Joseph Matthew, now aware of his true identity and surrounded by his father's love, was thriving. Adjusting to their new life together was a gradual process. Michael devoted time and energy to ensure that Joseph Matthew felt comfortable and secure. He redecorated a room especially for his son, with all the toys and books Matthew had always dreamed of. The walls were adorned with Joseph Matthew's drawings, a constant reminder of the boy's creativity and resilience. "Joseph Matthew, this is your home now. I want you to feel free to be who you are." Michael said as he hung the last drawing on the wall. Joseph Matthew smiled, his eyes shining with happiness. "Thank you, Daddy. I've never had a room like this. It's perfect." In addition to adjusting to domestic life, Michael continued his philanthropic work with renewed vigor. He believed that his good deeds could transform society and fill hearts with hope. With Joseph Matthew by his side, Michael visited schools, hospitals, and orphanages, always looking for ways to help the less fortunate. At a charity event, Michael gave an inspiring speech about the importance of helping others. "My life has changed drastically in the past few months, and it has made me realize the value of compassion and solidarity. By helping those in need, we find a greater purpose and a profound sense of fulfillment." Joseph Matthew, always present, watched his father's work with admiration. He began to understand the importance of giving back to the community and often helped with philanthropic initiatives, distributing toys and books to other children. Each year on Andrea's birthday, Michael and Joseph Matthew made a special visit to her grave. It was a moment of reflection and tribute, where they shared stories and memories. Michael always brought fresh flowers, and Joseph Matthew placed one of his drawings on the grave, a way to show Andrea that despite the distance, they remained connected. "Andrea, I miss you every day, but I promise I am doing everything I can to take care of our son. He is a wonderful boy, full of life and dreams," Michael said, feeling Andrea's presence in every word. Joseph Matthew held Michael's hand and added, "Mummy, I'm okay. Daddy takes very good care of me, and I always think of you. I hope you're proud of us." As time passed, Michael and Joseph Matthew fully adjusted to their new life. The mansion was filled with love, laughter, and hope. They spent their days exploring new hobbies, such as gardening and cooking together, and their nights reading stories before bed. Michael also began to speak publicly about his journey at charity events, using his experience to inspire others to never give up, even in the darkest moments. He wanted to share his experience with the world, hoping to inspire others to never give up, even in the darkest moments. Joseph Matthew, I want you to always remember that, no matter what happens, there is always hope, Michael explained as they spent time together. "I love it, Daddy. I think we're going to help a lot of people," Joseph Matthew responded with a proud smile. Michael and Joseph Matthew's life was a testament to the power of love and perseverance. Together, they faced immense challenges and emerged stronger. They continued to work tirelessly to help others, living by the philosophy that kindness and compassion can truly change the world. As they looked to the future, Michael and Joseph Matthew knew that, no matter what happened, they would always have each other. And with that, they were ready to face whatever destiny had in store for them, always with hearts full of hope and minds focused on doing good. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.